You know, I've often wondered if there's a world record for the sheer, unadulterated gall exhibited by a homeowners association. If there is, I think my former, uninvited, and most definitely unneighborly HOA might just have clinched it. They didn't just bend the rules, they snapped them in half, threw them on a bonfire, and danced around the flames. And what was their grand prize for this display of suburban lunacy? Well, let's just say it involved a judgment for $20 million. Yes, you heard that right. $20 million. Drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from, because this story is a wild ride and you'll want to buckle up. It all started so beautifully, so peacefully, which I suppose is how all the best horror stories begin, isn't it? Several years ago, after a rather demanding career designing high-security, luxury estates for people who valued their privacy as much as their portfolios, I decided it was time to design one for myself. I found the perfect piece of land, a sprawling, idyllic acreage bordering a pristine lake, complete with its own gently sloping private beach and enough shoreline to build a sturdy, elegant fishing dock. The house itself was my masterpiece, designed for comfort, beauty, and, ironically, security. It was set well back from the access road, shielded by a natural berm and mature trees, with a single, robust, automated gate securing the long, winding driveway. This wasn't just a home, it was my sanctuary, my reward for decades of meticulous work, and crucially, when I bought this land and built my home, there was no HOA, none. It was a pocket of blissful autonomy. The trouble, as it often does, crept in slowly, like a weed. A few years after I settled in, a new development sprang up on the far side of the lake, and with it came the Lakeview Estates Homeowners Association. I wasn't part of it. My property predated it by a considerable margin, and I had no intention of joining. My land was explicitly, legally, and geographically separate. I wished them well, from a distance. A very long distance. The first I heard from them directly was a polite, if somewhat presumptuous, letter inviting me to join their association. I politely declined. Then came another, suggesting I might like to contribute to their community enhancement fund. I declined that too, perhaps a little less politely. The antagonist in this suburban drama, the queen bee of Lakeview Estates HOA, was a woman named Brenda McMasters. Brenda was, to put it mildly, a character. She drove a pearlescent white Escalade that always seemed to be freshly, aggressively waxed. Her attire consisted mainly of expensive-looking leisure suits in shades that nature never intended for fabric, think radioactive coral and electric lime. She had a helmet of perfectly coiffed blonde hair that defied wind and, seemingly, gravity, and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Her eyes, you see, were always calculating, always assessing, always looking for an angle. She carried herself with the air of a minor potentate ruling over her freshly paved fiefdom. The first hint that Brenda's ambitions extended beyond the neatly manicured lawns of Lakeview Estates came subtly. I'd occasionally see unfamiliar cars parked just outside my property line, near the main road, their occupants looking wistfully towards my lakefront. Then, one Saturday morning, as I was enjoying coffee on my veranda overlooking the lake, I saw them, two men, fishing poles in hand, strolling down my beach as if they owned it. I'm not an unreasonable man. I went down, introduced myself, and politely explained that this was private property. They seemed genuinely surprised, mumbled an apology, and left. I chalked it up to an honest mistake. Perhaps they'd wandered from a public access point further down the lake, though mine was clearly marked. A week later, it was a family, complete with a yappy little dog that took an immediate dislike to my prize-winning roses. This time, the interaction was less cordial. The father, a portly man in a too-tight fishing vest, gestured vaguely. Brenda said it was okay, said it was a community lake. I corrected him firmly. This specific part of the lakefront is private property, mine in fact. The community lake access for Lakeview Estates is on the other side. He grumbled, but eventually corralled his family and retreated. The mention of Brenda's name was like a small red flag. The real bombshell dropped a few days after that. I was reviewing security footage, a habit ingrained from my profession, after noticing some fresh litter near my dock. There she was, Brenda McMasters, bold as brass, at my main gate. She wasn't trying to buzz in. she wasn't trying to climb it. She calmly produced a key, inserted it into the manual override lock, a lock I rarely used but maintained for emergencies, and opened my gate. She then ushered through a small group of people, gesturing expansively towards my beach and dock as if she were a tour guide presenting a newly acquired public park. She even had the audacity to relock the gate behind them. My blood ran cold. That was my key, or rather, a copy of it. There were only a few master keys in existence. One with me, one securely stored in my safe, and one with my trusted head gardener, an elderly gentleman named Miguel who had worked for me for years and was the soul of discretion. The lock was a high-security Medico, not something you can just get copied at the local hardware store without authorization. Someone had stolen my gate key, copied it, and Brenda was now acting as the doorkeeper to my private paradise. I suddenly felt like the security I had so carefully designed was nothing more than a flimsy theatrical prop. The sense of violation was profound. This wasn't just trespass. This was a calculated invasion, orchestrated by the Queen of Lime Green leisure suits herself. The fight, I realized with a sinking heart, had just begun. And I had a distinct feeling Brenda had no idea who she was messing with. My immediate instinct, honed from years of dealing with complex projects and even more complex personalities, was to gather information before confronting the issue head-on. The sight of Brenda nonchalantly using a key to my private gate, treating my property like a public thoroughfare, was infuriating, but raw anger wouldn't solve this. I needed to understand the scope of the problem. That evening, I reviewed several days' worth of security footage from multiple cameras covering my gate, driveway, and lakefront. The findings were staggering. It wasn't just a few isolated incidents. Brenda, or someone else using a key, was opening my gate multiple times a day. Groups of people, families with children, clusters of teenagers, older couples with picnic baskets, were streaming onto my beach, using my dock, some even bringing inflatable rafts and loud music. My private sanctuary had been turned into the unofficial Lakeview Estates Beach Club. The most galling part was their utter lack of discretion. They'd leave behind food wrappers, empty beer cans, discarded fishing line. My carefully maintained beach was starting to show signs of erosion from increased foot traffic. The flower beds near the beach path were trampled. My custom-built teak dock had fresh scratches and what looked suspiciously like fish guts ground into the wood. It was as if they believed their access was a God-given right and my property was merely the venue for their amusement. The sheer entitlement was breathtaking. The next morning, I decided a direct albeit firm conversation with Brenda McMasters was in order. I drove over to the Lakeview Estates Community Center, a modest building with an overly ambitious sign. Her Escalade was parked ostentatiously near the entrance. I found her holding court in a small office, surrounded by what I assumed were other HOA board members, a collection of vaguely harried-looking individuals who seemed to orbit Brenda like nervous satellites. "Brenda," I began, keeping my voice level, "we need to talk about your members trespassing on my property." She gave me that infuriatingly placid smile. "Oh, Mr. Harrison, so good of you to drop by. Trespassing? I think that's such a strong word. We prefer to think of it as community sharing." One of her satellites, a thin woman with anxious eyes, chimed in, "The lake is for everyone, after all." "My land bordering the lake, however, is not," I stated, "and your members are accessing it via my private, locked gate. A gate, I might add, for which you seem to have a key." Brenda waved a dismissive hand, adorned with several chunky, gold-tone rings. Now, let's not get bogged down in technicalities. Your property is so large, Mr. Harrison. Acres and acres. Surely there's room for everyone. You have gardeners, they can tidy up. You won't even notice a few extra people enjoying the lovely view. Think of it as fostering goodwill. I stared at her, momentarily speechless at the audacity. "Brenda," I said, my voice dangerously calm, "you are facilitating illegal entry onto my land. That key you have was obtained illicitly. I expect this to stop immediately, and I expect that key, and any copies, to be returned." Her smile tightened. "Oh, I don't think so. The Lakeview Estates Fishing and Recreation Club is proving very popular. Our members are delighted with the new access. It's really boosted community spirit." The What? I asked, incredulous. The Lakeview Estates Fishing and Recreation Club, she repeated, beaming as if she'd just announced a Nobel Prize recipient. A little initiative of mine gives everyone a chance to enjoy the best part of the lake, your part. The casual admission that she'd essentially founded a club based on the illegal use of my property was the moment I knew any attempt at a reasonable, neighborly solution was doomed. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was deliberate, orchestrated theft of access and enjoyment of my land. You're not even part of our petty hoe, she added, as if that were some sort of justification for her actions, a little barbed to remind me I was an outsider. And you bought your property before this HOA even existed, so you don't understand our community's needs. The logic was so twisted it was almost an art form. My pre-existing rights were somehow a disadvantage in her eyes. My legal standing, Brenda, is perfectly clear, I replied. And it will be made even clearer if this continues. Consider this your only informal warning. She actually chuckled. Warnings? Oh, Mr. Harrison, you architects do get so dramatic. Don't worry your handsome head about it, it's all working out splendidly. I left her office, the faint scent of her overpowering perfume and the echoes of her condescension clinging to me like cheap cologne. It was obvious she considered me a minor nuisance, easily dismissed. She had no idea of the hornet's nest she was prodding with a very expensive, very ill-gotten key. Back home, I contacted Miguel, my head gardener. He was deeply distressed. His key was accounted for, securely locked away where he always kept it. He swore no one else had access. This meant the original key stolen was likely mine, perhaps lifted during a brief moment of inattention, or through a more targeted act I hadn't yet identified. The thought made my skin crawl. The immediate priority was to upgrade security and start documenting everything meticulously. I had high-resolution, motion-activated cameras, but I decided to supplement them. I ordered more, covering every conceivable angle of the gate, the driveway, the beach, and the dock. I started a detailed log: dates, times, number of individuals, photographs of litter and damage. I even invested in a high-quality drone with a zoom lens, ensuring I operated it legally within my own property boundaries, to get clear shots of the fishing and recreation club in full swing. The footage was damning. People setting up elaborate picnics, kids tearing around, even someone attempting to moor a small, noisy jet ski to my fishing dock. My beautiful, tranquil lakeside was becoming a public nuisance, all courtesy of Brenda McMasters and her stolen key. The "you have gardeners anyway" comment particularly stuck in my craw. It wasn't just about the mess. It was about the utter disrespect for my property, my privacy, and the work that went into maintaining it. My gardeners were skilled horticulturists, not a private sanitation crew for an entitled HOA. I decided it was time to consult legal counsel. This wasn't going to be resolved with polite requests. This was going to require a much firmer hand, backed by the full weight of the law. I knew a lawyer, Arthur Kingsley, one of an old-school breed, sharp, relentless, and possessing a deep understanding of property rights and, more importantly, how to deal with bullies who thought they were above the law. Arthur, I suspected, would find Brenda McMasters particularly stimulating. The game, as they say, was afoot. And I intended to win. Arthur Kingsley listened to my story with an expression that shifted from mild interest to focused intensity, his sharp eyes missing no detail. He was a man who appreciated precision, and my architect's mind, along with the preliminary evidence I'd already gathered, gave him a solid foundation. The drone footage of the Lakeview Estates Fishing and Recreation Club in full swing, complete with timestamps and GPS data confirming it was all happening deep within my property lines, made his eyebrows arch in a way that signaled both professional interest and a touch of grim satisfaction. Brenda McMasters, he mused, tapping a pen against a yellow legal pad after I'd finished. Sounds like a classic specimen. Overreach, entitlement, and a fundamental misunderstanding of the word mine. She believes my property's size negates my right to exclusivity, I said. And she actually told me, you have gardeners anyway, as if that absolves them of any responsibility for the mess and damage. Arthur chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. The burden of abundance argument. Charming, and the stolen key is the linchpin. We need to ascertain precisely how that was accomplished. Not just for the trespass, but for potential conversion or even larceny charges, depending on the specifics. Our first official step was a meticulously crafted cease and desist letter. It was a work of legal art, polite yet utterly unyielding, detailing the ongoing trespass, the illegal use of a duplicated key, the specific statutes being violated, and the clear demand for all such activities to stop immediately. It also demanded the return of all keys, an inventory of how many had been made, and a list of individuals to whom they had been distributed. We sent it via certified mail with return receipt requested, addressed to Brenda McMasters in her official capacity as HOA president, and to each known board member. Brenda's response when it came was not a letter from an attorney. It was a handwritten note on Lakeview Estates HOA letterhead, scrawled in an overly florid script with what looked like a glitter pen. It read in its entirety, "Dear Mr. Harrison, thank you for your input. The community appreciates the lake access. We will take your concerns under advisement. Cordially, Brenda McMasters, President." Under advisement, it was the suburban equivalent of talk to the hand. "She's either incredibly arrogant or incredibly foolish," Arthur commented, looking at the sparkly note with disdain. "Possibly both. This strengthens our position considerably. It demonstrates a willful disregard for a formal legal warning." The trespass continued unabated. In fact, it seemed to escalate. Perhaps Brenda, emboldened by her own audacity, had decided to double down. My new cameras captured even more activity. I saw people trying to pry open the door to my boathouse. One enterprising individual was attempting to string up a volleyball net between two of my ancient oak trees. The Fishing and Recreation Club was clearly expanding its recreational offerings. The damage was also mounting. The beach was looking ragged, my dock was accumulating more dings and stains, and the constant presence of strangers had shattered the peace I'd cherished. My investigation into the key theft became a quiet obsession. I reviewed gate logs, cross-referencing them with my own movements and those of my staff. I spoke again with Miguel, who was as perplexed and angry as I was. Then, a small breakthrough. Miguel remembered a new landscaping crew, hired by the HOA for the common areas of Lakeview Estates, had been working near my property line about 2 months prior, right before the trespassing began in earnest. One of them had approached him at the gate, asking for a drink of water and making small talk. Miguel, being a kindly man, had obliged. His own gate key was on a lanyard around his neck, tucked into his shirt. He hadn't removed it. But my primary gate control panel, the one with the manual key override, was just inside the gate. Was it possible someone had seen me use the physical key previously, noted its location, and used the distraction of Miguel to somehow access it, or the spare I kept in a small, locked maintenance box just inside the gate for emergency contractor access? I focused my security footage review on that period, and there it was, a grainy but identifiable image. During the brief interaction with Miguel, another member of that landscaping crew, unseen by Miguel who was getting water, had slipped near the gate's pedestrian entrance. He was there for less than 30 seconds, fiddling with something near the maintenance box. The box itself had a fairly standard lock, nothing like the Medico on the main gate mechanism itself. I checked the box. The spare key was gone. This wasn't a sophisticated breach of my Medico system. It was a common opportunistic theft of a hidden spare, likely by someone who knew where to look or got lucky. And who would direct a landscaping crew member, or be informed by one? The HOA, Brenda. The smoking gun we'd been hoping for arrived in an unexpected way. One of my few acquaintances in the Lakeview Estates, a quiet retiree named Mr. Henderson, who I'd chatted with occasionally when he walked his dog on the public road, approached me one afternoon, looking nervous. "Mr. Harrison," he began, I feel I ought to show you something." He handed me a copy of the latest Lakeview Estates OA newsletter. There, on the front page, under a beaming photo of Brenda McMasters cutting a ceremonial ribbon tied, I kid you not, to a fishing rod stuck in the sand, was an article titled, "Grand Opening of the Lakeview Estates Fishing and Recreation Club, Your New Lakeside Paradise." The article went on to describe the generous new access to the premier fishing and beach spot on the lake, complete with directions that implicitly led to my gate. It even mentioned a nominal annual club fee of $50 per household to help with upkeep and insurance. Insurance for trespassing on my land. They were monetizing their crime. Arthur's eyes lit up like a Christmas tree when I showed him the newsletter. "Oh, this is beautiful," he said almost reverently. "They're not just trespassing, they're running a commercial enterprise using your property as the primary asset, and they're documenting it themselves. Brenda McMasters may just be the gift that keeps on giving." The newsletter also mentioned that access fobs, which I now knew were my copied keys, were available to all members in good standing. This wasn't just a few keys, this was potentially hundreds. The sheer scale of it was mind-boggling. We now had evidence of willful trespass, organized activity, potential theft, and now, clear proof they were profiting from it and had distributed keys en masse. Arthur leaned back in his chair. "All right, Mr. Harrison. I believe we have more than enough to proceed. We're past cease and desist letters. It's time to file suit. And we're not just going for an injunction, we're going for damages. Significant damages. This isn't just about stopping them, it's about making them understand the gravity of their actions." The thought of a protracted legal battle wasn't appealing, but the thought of Brenda and her club continuing to violate my home was even less so. "Let's do it, Arthur," I said. "Let them see what happens when they mistake an architect's patience for weakness." My resolve had hardened from frustration into cold steel. Brenda wanted a fight. She was about to get one she couldn't possibly win. The lawsuit landed on Brenda McMaster's desk with the subtlety of a dropped anvil. Arthur had drafted a complaint that was both a legal sledgehammer and a work of art, detailing every transgression, from the initial trespass to the theft of the key, the establishment of the Fishing and Recreation Club, the widespread distribution of copied keys, the damage to my property, the loss of quiet enjoyment, and the unjust enrichment from their club fees. We weren't just suing the HOA, we were also exploring avenues to hold Brenda and key board members personally liable, given the evidence of their direct involvement and willful disregard. The sum we were claiming for damages, covering property restoration, diminished value, punitive damages for the egregious conduct, legal fees, and emotional distress, was substantial. Though we hadn't yet finalized the precise $20 million figure, that would come later with detailed valuations and expert testimony. The HOA's initial response, via their newly hired, rather flustered-looking attorney, was one of bluster and denial. They claimed the access was historic, a blatant falsehood easily disproven by property records. They argued that my security measures were excessive and unneighborly. They even had the temerity to suggest that I was creating a nuisance by denying the community access to what they now painted as a de facto public resource. It was a masterclass in deflection and victim blaming. Brenda, I heard through the grapevine, was telling everyone in Lakeview Estates that this was just a minor misunderstanding being blown out of proportion by a reclusive millionaire. The discovery process was where our meticulous preparation truly began to shine. My extensive video library, cataloged and cross-referenced, became Exhibit A. Hours of footage showed a veritable army of Lakeview Estates residents treating my property like a county fairground. The drone shots, crystal clear and professionally presented, were particularly damning, showing the sheer scale of the incursions and the damage being done. My logs detailed every piece of trash collected, every plant trampled, every scratch on my dock. We had sworn affidavits from Miguel and other staff members. We even had the infamous HOA newsletter, with Brenda's smiling face right above the announcement of her illegal enterprise. Depositions were, for me, a highlight of controlled fury. Brenda McMasters arrived in a power suit the color of a chemically enhanced sunset, her confidence seemingly undiminished. Under Arthur's polite but surgically precise questioning, however, her composure began to fray. "Mrs. McMasters," Arthur began, his tone deceptively mild, "could you explain the process by which the Lakeview Estates HOA obtained a key to Mr. Harrison's private, secured gate?" Brenda smiled vaguely. "It was made available for community benefit." "Made available by whom, Mrs. McMasters?" "These things, you know, they sometimes just appear when there's a need," Arthur pressed. Are you aware that Mr. Harrison reported a key stolen from a secure maintenance box on his property? I hear all sorts of rumors, Mr. Kingsley. Most of them are just noise. But when Arthur presented her with enlarged stills from my security footage showing the landscaping crew member at the gate box, and then connected that crew to HOA contracts, her facade cracked. She blustered about misinterpretations and unrelated incidents. When he produced the newsletter advertising the Fishing and Recreation Club and questioned her about the nominal annual club fee, she claimed it was for insurance and general community activities, denying it was tied to accessing my property, a claim directly contradicted by the newsletter's own wording. Her testimony was a tapestry of evasion and outright lies, all dutifully recorded by the court stenographer. The HOA board members, when deposed, were a sorry lot. Most tried to distance themselves, claiming Brenda was the driving force and they were merely following her lead. Some admitted, under pressure, that they had reservations but were too intimidated or too apathetic to challenge her. It painted a clear picture of an HOA hijacked by an overzealous president and enabled by a compliant board. The HOA's lawyer tried a few countermaneuvers. They attempted to file a nuisance complaint against me, citing unreasonable restrictions on lake access, a desperate ploy that the judge dismissed almost immediately, given the clarity of my property rights. They argued that the damages we were claiming were speculative and excessive. This is where my background in high-end property development and an understanding of valuation became particularly useful. We brought in expert appraisers to assess the diminishment of my property's value due to the prolonged, publicized trespass and the perceived public nature of my private beach. They quantified the cost of restoring the beach, repairing the dock, replanting damaged landscaping, and upgrading security to prevent future incursions. We also engaged a forensic accountant to analyze the HOA's finances, particularly relating to the Fishing and Recreation Club fees. While the $50 per household didn't sound like much individually, multiplied by several hundred homes over the period, it added up. More importantly, it demonstrated intent and profit motive. The stress was clearly taking its toll on the Lakeview Estates community. Rumors began to circulate about massive legal bills and the potential for a huge special assessment if they lost the case. Some residents, like Mr. Henderson, quietly expressed their support for me, admitting they'd always been uncomfortable with Brenda's scheme but felt powerless. One anonymous package even arrived at Arthur's office containing internal HOA emails where Brenda explicitly discussed liberating my lakefront for the good of the community and dismissed potential legal risks as scare tactics from a rich recluse. This anonymous gift was pure gold, showing premeditation and malice. As the trial date approached, Arthur felt confident. Brenda's arrogance is her Achilles heel, he told me. She genuinely believes she's done nothing wrong, or that her intentions somehow sanctify her actions. The evidence, however, tells a very different, very expensive story. We refined our calculation of damages. The cost to repair the physical damage to the beach, shoreline, which had specific environmental protections due to rare aquatic plants that the trespassers had disturbed, and dock was substantial. The loss of quiet enjoyment for over a year was valued highly. The temporary, and potentially, if not rectified, permanent stigma attached to the property as having disputed access significantly impacted its market value in the multi-million-dollar range. Then there were punitive damages. Arthur explained that Brenda's and the HOA's conduct, the theft, the lies, the blatant disregard for legal warnings, the attempt to profit, was exactly the kind of behavior punitive damages were designed to punish and deter. We aimed for a figure that would not only compensate me, but also send an unmistakable message. That figure, carefully calculated and robustly supported by expert testimony and evidence, was $20 million. It sounded like an astronomical sum, but when you broke down the actual harm, the loss of value to a unique multi-million-dollar estate, and the sheer, unmitigated gall of the defendants, it began to look entirely appropriate. The stage was set for a showdown, and Brenda McMasters was about to learn that some gates, once opened, unleash forces far beyond her control. The courtroom was less dramatic than television would have you believe, but the tension was palpable. Brenda McMasters arrived each day in a new, power-colored ensemble, her expression a carefully constructed mask of confident indignation. Her HOA board members looked increasingly green around the gills. My side of the aisle was Arthur, myself, and our team of experts, armed with binders of evidence, depositions, and meticulously prepared arguments. Arthur's opening statement was a masterclass in understated power. He laid out the facts calmly, chronologically, painting a picture not of a simple boundary dispute, but of a calculated, sustained campaign of trespass, conversion, and willful disregard for property rights, orchestrated by an HOA president drunk on her own perceived authority. He used my security footage sparingly but effectively, showing the court key moments, Brenda herself using the copied key, the sheer volume of people on my beach, the casual damage being inflicted. The infamous HOA newsletter, blown up on a large display, drew murmurs from the public gallery. Our experts testified methodically. The land surveyor confirmed my property lines with irrefutable precision. The environmental consultant detailed the damage to the sensitive shoreline ecosystem, estimating significant remediation costs. The real estate appraiser explained how the HOA's actions and the publicity around the fishing and recreation club had created a cloud on my title and demonstrably lowered the property's market value by several $1 million, requiring legal action and public rectification to restore. He spoke of stigma damages and the loss of the unique exclusivity and privacy that commanded the premium value of such an estate. My head gardener, Miguel, gave heartfelt testimony about the state of the grounds and the distress it caused him. When Brenda took the stand, it was clear she still believed she could charm or bully her way through. She portrayed herself as a community champion, fighting for the little guy against a wealthy landowner hoarding a natural resource. Under Arthur's cross-examination, however, her narrative crumbled. He confronted her with her deposition testimony, highlighting the inconsistencies and outright falsehoods. He showed her the internal emails, the ones from the anonymous whistleblower, where she cavalierly dismissed legal risks. "Mrs. McMasters?" Arthur asked, his voice quiet, but carrying throughout the courtroom. "This email here, dated 3 weeks after you received our cease and desist letter, you state, and I quote, 'Harrison can huff and puff, but he won't blow our little club down. The lake belongs to the people.' Did I read that correctly?" Brenda flushed a dangerous shade of magenta that clashed horribly with her teal jacket. I may have been expressing frustration with his unwillingness to share." "Frustration, Mrs. McMasters? Or a clear statement of intent to continue your illegal activities despite being warned by counsel?" Her attorney objected repeatedly, but the judge, a stern, no-nonsense woman who had clearly read all the pre-trial briefs, overruled him more often than not. Brenda's credibility was visibly dissolving. The HOA's defense was weak. Their lawyer tried to argue that the damage was minimal, that the club fees were unrelated, that my claims were exaggerated. But they had no credible witnesses to refute our evidence, no plausible explanation for the stolen key, no justification for the newsletter. Their own board members, when called, reluctantly confirmed Brenda's dominant role and their own lack of oversight. One of the most compelling pieces of evidence, almost by accident, was a photograph I had taken before the HOA existed. It showed my pristine beach, the undisturbed shoreline, the calm water reflecting a perfect blue sky. Arthur contrasted this with a recent drone photograph showing the eroded sand, the trampled vegetation, the litter, and the general air of a neglected public park. The visual difference was stark and spoke volumes. The calculation of the $20 million in damages was laid out piece by piece. 1. Property restoration and environmental remediation, approximately $2.5 million. This included rebuilding parts of the beach, extensive replanting of native species along the shoreline, some of which were rare and required specialist nurseries, repairing the dock, and deep cleaning. 2. Diminution of property value. Expert testimony placed this at $7 million. Even with the trespass stopped, the history of the dispute and the need for ongoing vigilance had a tangible negative impact on the desirability and marketability of such a high-value private estate. 3. Loss of quiet enjoyment and emotional distress. Calculated over the nearly 2-year period of intense disruption, this was valued at $1.5 million. My home, my sanctuary, had been violated. 4. Disgorgement of unjust enrichment. The club fees collected, while not enormous, plus a multiplier for the illicit benefit derived, came to $500,000. 5. Legal fees. Arthur's firm, plus expert witness costs, were projected to be around $1.5 million due to the complexity and contested nature of the case. 6. Punitive damages. This was the largest component. Arthur argued that the HOA's conduct was malicious, oppressive, and fraudulent, warranting a substantial punitive award to deter them and others from similar behavior. He asked for $7 million here, bringing the total to $20 million. He argued that anything less would not be a sufficient deterrent for an organization that had shown such contempt for the law and private property rights. The judge listened intently to the closing arguments. Arthur summarized our case with devastating clarity. The HOA's lawyer made a somewhat desperate plea, painting the HOA as a small community organization being crushed by a wealthy individual. The wait for the verdict was agonizing. Not because I doubted our case, but because so much depended on it, not just the money, but the principle. When the judge finally delivered her ruling, she didn't mince words. She found comprehensively in my favor on all counts. She cited the overwhelming evidence of trespass, the clear evidence of conversion regarding the key, and the astonishing arrogance and bad faith demonstrated by the HOA president and, by extension, the board for its failure to act. She described Brenda's actions as a campaign of harassment and unlawful appropriation. And then came the damages. She went through each category. She awarded the full amounts for restoration, diminution of value, loss of enjoyment, and legal fees. For disgorgement, she actually increased it slightly, noting the HOA's lack of transparency, and for punitive damages, she looked directly at Brenda, who had gone pale. The court finds, the judge stated, her voice firm, that the conduct of the Lakeview Estates HOA, spearheaded by its president, was indeed malicious, oppressive, and undertaken with a conscious disregard for the rights of Mr. Harrison. This court must send a message that such behavior will not be tolerated. She awarded the full $7 million in punitive damages. The grand total, $20 million. A gasp went through the courtroom. Brenda looked like she'd been struck by lightning. Her lawyer was frantically scribbling notes. Arthur gave my arm a discreet squeeze. Vindication. It was a powerful, cleansing feeling. The gavel fell, and it was over. Or rather, that chapter was. The consequences were just beginning to unfold for the Lakeview Estates HOA. The aftermath of the $20 million judgment was, predictably, catastrophic for the Lakeview Estates Homeowners Association and its erstwhile queen, Brenda McMasters. The news spread through the local community like wildfire. Brenda was immediately, and very publicly, ousted as HOA president. I heard she tried to argue that the HOA's insurance would cover it, but the insurer, upon reviewing the judgment and the nature of the willful, malicious acts, denied the claim, stating that intentional wrongdoing wasn't covered. This left the HOA members themselves on the hook. The HOA board, now in full panic mode, held emergency meetings. The math was grim. $20 million divided by a few hundred homes meant a special assessment that was financially ruinous for most residents. We're talking figures that likely exceeded the equity many had in their homes. Houses started going up for sale almost immediately, often at discounted prices, as residents tried to escape the impending financial tsunami. The community spirit Brenda had so proudly touted evaporated, replaced by anger, recrimination, and fear. Brenda McMasters herself did not escape personal consequences. While the bulk of the judgment was against the HOA as an entity, Arthur had laid the groundwork to pursue her personally for her direct role and the clear evidence of her malicious intent, especially concerning the misappropriation of club fees and the fraudulent representations she'd made. Facing potential personal bankruptcy and further legal action, she sold her pearlescent Escalade. I saw it listed online, a distress sale, and her aggressively modern house. She disappeared from the local scene rather quickly, reportedly moving several states away. The era of the electric lime leisure suit was officially over in our town. The Lakeview Estates HOA, as an organization, effectively collapsed. Many residents refused to pay the astronomical special assessment, leading to liens, foreclosures, and a complete breakdown of HOA governance. Eventually, the HOA was forced into receivership. My $20 million judgment became a primary claim against its assets, which were minimal beyond the common areas. Arthur, ever the pragmatist, negotiated a settlement where the HOA signed over its common lands, including their actual, legitimate lake access point on the other side of the lake, to a newly formed, court-supervised trust tasked with liquidating assets to pay creditors, primarily me. We knew we wouldn't see the full $20 million in cash, but the transfer of their own prized lakefront land to partially satisfy the debt was an irony too delicious to ignore. They had tried to steal my lakefront. Now, they had lost theirs because of it. For my part, I began the slow process of healing my property and my peace of mind. The restoration work was extensive but cathartic. The beach was regraded and replanted. The shoreline's delicate ecosystem began its recovery under expert care. My dock was repaired to its former glory. New, even more formidable security measures were installed, though I doubted I'd have much trouble from Lakeview Estates again. The transferred HOA common land, including their old beach, eventually became a small public conservation area, managed by a local land trust, ensuring it would be properly cared for, a far better outcome than Brenda's chaotic fishing and recreation club. The lessons learned were profound. Firstly, that meticulous documentation is your greatest weapon against arrogance and deceit. My cameras, my logs, my drone footage, they were the silent, irrefutable witnesses that unraveled Brenda's entire charade. Secondly, never underestimate the lengths to which entitled individuals will go to get what they want, nor the extent of their self-delusion. Brenda genuinely seemed to believe her actions were justified. Thirdly, good legal counsel is worth its weight in gold. Arthur Kingsley was a bulldog in a bespoke suit, and his strategic acumen was instrumental. The wider community, I think, also learned something. There was a palpable shift in how HOAs in the region operated, a renewed respect for property lines and individual rights. My case became a local cautionary tale, the Harrison Judgment, they called it, a stark reminder of the consequences of overreach and abuse of power. Some of the more reasonable former residents of Lakeview Estates, those who had been uncomfortable with Brenda's reign but felt powerless, actually reached out to apologize for what had happened, which I appreciated. My sanctuary is quiet once more. The lapping of the lake against the shore, the call of the loons, the rustle of leaves in the breeze. These are the only sounds that now drift across my property. The Fishing and Recreation Club is a distant, almost comical memory, a testament to the sheer, unadulterated gall that ultimately cost its architects everything. It was a long, expensive, and stressful battle, but seeing justice done, seeing my haven restored, and knowing that a petty tyrant got her comeuppance, that, my friends, was worth every bit of the fight. So, if you've got a crazy HOA story of your own, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. Thanks for sticking with me through this wild saga. It just goes to show, sometimes the biggest bullies make the loudest crash when they finally fall.